So today I'm going to be talking about this 50 caliber Thompson center hawkin. So before I get started, excuse the mess. I'm currently building a model railroad, so I've pretty much trashed my whole basement in the process. But anyway, so for those of you who don't know, the Thompson center hawkin is a 50 caliber muzzleloader that is meant to be a reproduction, or at least a close depiction, of the 1830s trapper rifles. They were used out west quite a bit from what I understood, and I believe they were usually 54 caliber. This particular one is 50 caliber, and I think they used to come in 45. Earlier versions in the 1830s were flintlock rifles, but then they switched to the cap lock system, which is much simpler. You just simply put a number 11 percussion cap right here to set off your main charge. Which was news to me when I first learned that, because I thought the cap lock system came about in the Civil War. I didn't realize it went back that far. The shooting aspects, this simply has square knot sights. They are fully adjustable. The rear sight is both windage and elevation adjustable. The front sight is a drift sight. Alright, so one notable thing about the sights is they're definitely not very fine. The front sight's actually very tall. There's also a big gap between the rear sight and the front sight in terms of the picture you get. I'm gonna guess that this is just meant for quicker target acquisition, because obviously you're not gonna be shooting very far away with a rifle like this. So in terms of how this rifle balances and points, it has a very planted feel to it. I'm not gonna call it front heavy, but most of the weight does tend to feel shifted forward on this rifle when you hold it. So the barrel length on this is 25 inches. It's really 26 inches, but I'm not sure if the rifling in this goes all the way back, or if it's smooth where the powder charge normally would occupy. The twist rate on most of these is 1 in 48, suited for heavier ammo. This was actually my first rifle that my father gave me. Most people get 22s. I started with a 50 caliber muzzleloader, but I believe he got it through doing some computer work for somebody, and I think an additional 150 bucks. In terms of the ammo that I usually shoot through this, I use round balls a lot just to kind of plank with. I've also used the Great Plains Hornady 385 grain bullets, I believe. So you may have noticed this gun actually has two triggers. So the rear trigger is just a conventional rifle trigger. The front trigger, I'm sorry, I think I got that backwards. Yes, I did. My apologies. So, okay, the front trigger is a conventional rifle trigger until you pull the rear one, which will then set the front one to a hairpin. And let me tell you, this is the lightest trigger I've got in my collection. You absolutely do not want to set the hairpin until you are ready to shoot. Just a little demo here. Let me get closer. Oh, as you can see, if you put any weight on that at all, it will set the gun off. I've never actually tried to fire it by tapping it like that. It caught me off guard there. But yeah, it's incredibly light. I imagine it's designed like that, or was designed like that, because I think they actually were like that back in the day. Because if you were hunting and you pulled that big lock back, it definitely makes quite the noise. And you know, that would probably scare away any game animal you were hunting. So I guess the intended idea with this is you'd walk around with the trigger just set to normal, and then right before you're about to shoot, you would pull your rear trigger and set that as a hairpin. Yeah, you definitely would not walk around with that set. You would be very likely to accidentally discharge the gun. So it does have a half cock though. But using it would probably scare away anything you were trying to shoot at. So I actually don't think, even though you can fire it the way it is now without the hairpin set, the trigger has a really long pull that way, and it's also very heavy in terms of the brake force. So I really don't think that's ever intended to actually be used. It's really just more of a crude safety mechanism. 50 caliber muzzleloaders, I think, are just, especially the old style stuff like this, just really fun to shoot. It's like an old manual car or anything of that nature. It's just, there's just something fun about it. In terms of accuracy, I've never actually really put this on paper, so yeah, you might want to do your own research on that. I'm sure there's all kinds of forums of people claiming what they've gotten, but it's fun to shoot. It's fun to plink with. At least that's what I've always used it for. And you're probably wondering, where's the Ramrod? Well, there's a story behind that. So, of course, I used to shoot this a lot, and then it sat dormant for a while. I didn't even bother with any of my firearms for a very long time. And a buddy of mine decided to have a little function at his house, and we all decided to bring our guns and, shoot around in the backyard. Well, I knew everybody and their brother was going to bring AR-15s and all that, so I decided to be the weirdo and bring this. And this is probably what everyone had the most fun with. We all kind of took turns shooting it. But anywho, it was cold that day, and I was having a really, really, really hard time loading. I had brought the conicals, the Great Plains, the ones I was mentioning earlier, and I was having a difficult time loading them into the barrel, and I guess eventually the poor Ramrod could no longer shoulder the load, and it broke. And I've looked all over the internet to see if I could find a new one. I've had a hard time finding one, and it was news to me, but these rifles are no longer being made now. So I guess you would have to just buy one off of somebody who is selling it. So that may be a lathe project down the road, but I'm glad I own it. I really am. So I have a few tips about using one of these, and maybe some things you gotta be a little bit more mindful of as compared to using a more modern firearm. For one, if it's been sitting for a long time, I don't know if it's just dust or what, but a lot of times you'll go load up your first shot and fire it, and it won't go off. You'll have a dud. And, that's a scary situation. You have to sit there and wait for a little bit and see if you're not just going to have a hang fire, and then, try popping another cap on this. And a lot of times it won't work the second or third time. A lot of times I have to take an ignition wrench and take that nipple off and put a few grains of black powder down in there, put a new cap back on, and then it'll fire. Well, the way to avoid that is before you shoot, especially if it's been sitting for a while, like I said, is just take a cap, don't load the gun, and just fire the cap. It'll sound like a firecracker going off. You might get some dirty looks. Do it about 2 or 3 times. That'll kind of help preheat everything in here and blow any dust or debris out, so the gun will fire more reliably. I've had that happen a bunch of times. Another thing you shouldn't do that I've hypocritically done in this video is actually dry fire this. A lot of times if you keep dropping this hammer just on that nipple, you'll eventually mar the end of it and you won't be able to get any caps on. Now, if you shoot this, 3 to 5 times, depending on the ammunition you're using, round balls are a little more forgiving than this, but the conicals have a very, very tight fit in the bore, and a lot of times when you start getting hard to load, you'll need to brush the rifle out with a bore brush before you can continue. Well, if you do that, I always put the butt of again, you're going to look a little crazy, but I always put the butt of the gun on my shoulder and then clean it like that with the barrel pointing down. Reason for that is so all the grit and soot and debris falls out the front. Otherwise, just so you'll be back to the original problem I mentioned, where that stuff can actually clog up the nipple, and then you'll have a hard time getting the gun to shoot again. In terms of recoil, it definitely doesn't kick that bad. It's more like a strong push. I think most muzzle loaders are described as that. Or if you ever shot an M1 Garand, it's kind of similar to that. The M1 will move you quite a bit, but doesn't actually hurt. That applies to most situations with this rifle as well. That said, if you shoot off of a bench with the conicals, the stock geometry does kind of like to kind of pop upward quite a bit, and you'll definitely feel it at the cheek weld. But that's really it. Shooting off the shoulder standing up, it's pretty manageable. That's pretty much all I have to say. I appreciate you watching.